my beautiful Union nerds. I'd like to take you on a journey back in time. So let's jump into our awesomely cool Wayback Machine. Welcome to Boston, Massachusetts. It's around 1887. A man by the name of Alvin G. Brown owned a printing company known as Alvin G. Brown and Company. Brown had an idea to publish a journal that would be devoted to the concerns of letter carriers, but would also carry material of interest to all postal workers. This journal became known as The Record. The Record was first published in 1887, and sadly, the first editions were not preserved. The earliest available archived issue is Volume 2, Number 1, published in November 1888. From the beginning, The Record was destined to become more than just a journal for an audience of postal workers. In Tucson, Arizona, at the Tubac Presidio Historic Park, an employee does a reenactment of how printing was done in the late 1800s when Alvin G. Brown and Company would have been printing the Record for distribution. As you can see in this sped-up modern-day video, it is a lengthy process to print just a few pages. Have you ever heard of the saying, mind your P's and Q's? Well, it comes from the way printing presses worked during this time. You had to mind your P's and Q's as every letter was put into the press backwards. Printing staff would have to mind placing and putting away letters because P's and Q's looked almost identical. Now that you know about printing and Mr. Brown's company, let's talk about who he was as a person. Alvin G. Brown was a printer for a large majority of his life, but was also a Civil War veteran. During the Civil War, he was a commander and served in Company K of the 39th Massachusetts Volunteers, as seen here from a clipping from the Boston Globe, published in August 1926. That same year, Mr. Brown decided to retire and ended his longtime printing career. A year later, in Malden, Massachusetts, Mr. Brown passed away at the age of 85 from a month-long illness. In September 1887, the Quad City Times wrote of the editor, Thomas M. Up, is the youngest newspaper man in the United States. He will be a power in the land someday. In November 1888, editor Up wrote,
"The Postal Record will publish everything of possible interest to postal employees and will, as in the past, advocate justice and fairness to these faithful servants of the American public."
His vision for the magazine was to provide entertainment and promotion of fraternity amongst Post Office Department employees. Mr. Up was also the founder of the National Order of Backwoodsmen of America, which earned him the title as a naturalist. He frequently wrote on bird life and other subjects. According to the Indianapolis News, Mr. Up lost his life in March of 1915 in a house fire when he had exited the home safely but was concerned about his priceless coin collection and ran back into the house to save it. He unfortunately succumbed to the fire and passed away. In August 1889, in a meeting room above Schaefer's Saloon, 60 letter carriers attended a meeting. An association of letter carriers from Milwaukee had called for a national meeting of carriers to try and form a national organization. The gathering was timed to coincide with the annual reunion of the Grand Army of the Republic, which was an association of Union Army veterans. This was done so that letter carriers who were veterans could take advantage of the reduced fares train companies offered. Amongst the delegates who attended, representatives from across the country were not from the large cities, but were primarily from smaller, middle-sized cities. The delegates moved quickly and unanimously passed a resolution that officially established the National Association of Letter Carriers. On the following day, the delegates elected the first president of the newly established NALC, William H. Wood. John F. Victory, an immigrant from Ireland, arrived in the United States when he was just 4. By 15, he was running a newsstand and owned a cigar store in Warren, Rhode Island. He also established an overland express between Warren and Providence. Clearly, he was destined to be a part of the National Association of Letter Carriers. Mr. Victory started his letter carrier appointment in New York. On July 4, 1890, the New York letter carriers convened a meeting in which they invited representatives of the fledgling NALC. The following month, in Boston, Massachusetts, the first official convention was held. At this convention, John F. Victory was elected as the NALC secretary. A year later, in 1891, Secretary John F. Victory personally bought the postal record from Alvin G. Brown and Company, and served as the journal's editor while working to build up its subscription base during his term of office. Secretary Victory served as the NALC secretary for a term of 8 years. The Times-Herald wrote, "Through his magazine, as well as by personal effort, Mr. Victory did much to ensure the passage of an 8-hour law for the carriers by Congress, and he also worked hard in the interest of carriers who had overtime claims as a result of the non-observance of the law by the postmasters." At the Kansas City, Missouri Convention in 1893, a resolution was passed and the newly established NALC bought the postal record from Secretary Victory that year in December. The resolution authorized the National Union to fully take over ownership and the production of the 6-year-old magazine. Victory resigned as a letter carrier the following year. At 51 years old, the owner and editor of the Postal Record had suffered an illness for several months and passed away as published in a 1913 edition of the Times-Herald. The Postal Record is the oldest labor union journal in the United States, which presented the union's agenda on political, legislative, labor, and workplace issues. It emphasized on factual information so members could make informed decisions. It also explained how members could make their union stronger, their postal service better, and their country more responsive to the needs of working people. As you can see here, petitions also appeared in early volumes. This one is for equalization and increase of salary for letter carriers.
A big part of the history of our union, and in many ways it's the best resource for not just the present, but also the history of our union.
So really you can see how the history of America sort of is reflected in the pages of the magazine.
For the first 16 years, the Postal Record looked and felt like just about any other serious journal of its time, sporting a drab front cover listing the edition's contents. It was the 1800s of it all. The pages of the Postal Record in the early 20th century were several pages filled with transcripts of congressional debates on some bill of special carrier concern that would go before Congress. This was before collective bargaining, where all postal workers were forever to lobby Congress for pay raises as well as changes in working conditions. The best way for NALC members to see how their elected representatives were working hard on their behalf in Washington was to read up on congressional proceedings. One of the enduring legacies of the Postal Record has been its commitment to providing in-depth coverage of events of special interest to letter carriers. This was especially crucial in the many years the magazine existed before the internet was invented, let alone before access to it became commonplace. In 1907, the magazine broke out of the mold and began to reflect its true letter carrier pedigree, beginning with the introduction of Raffles. Raffles was the name given by the irreverent NALC members to the drawing of the rakish-looking postman, typical of the turn-of-the-century carrier. Raffles appeared on every cover of the Postal Record for 31 years, until he was replaced by a more modern-looking sketch.
The U.S. entered World War I in 1917. The president at the time, Edward Gaynor, used the pages of the magazine to connect letter carriers to their role in the war effort.
During the National Convention of that same year, in Dallas, Texas, the 664 delegates rose one by one and pleaded for President Gaynor to bring an immediate vote to be affiliated with the American Federation of Labor. Moved by the pleas of the delegates, the convention suspended its rules and voted. The NALC became immediately affiliated with the AFL on September 20th, 1917. Now that the NALC was affiliated with the AFL, the next milestone was the Civil Service Retirement Law passing in 1920. Furthermore, the National Service Relations Council pushed on and discussed topics directly related to the welfare of city letter carriers, such as uniforms, a possible Christmas holiday, working conditions within post offices, cafeterias, credit unions, and free physical examinations for workers. At the 33rd Convention in Los Angeles, a resolution passed that concluded it would be a decided advantage to have the postal record mailed to a member's residence, thereby giving it wider circulation among members' families and their friends. Until this resolution passed, the magazine was distributed to members in club bundles. Stacks of magazines were delivered to union halls and post office workrooms and left for the membership to take.
People actually have to look at mail before getting rid of it, and so what they found through these studies, through these surveys, is that people engage with their mail more than just about any other communication.
In August 1938, editor Michael T. Finnan came out with a new cover. It was still the same blue-gray color, but Raffles was replaced by a drawing of a vigorous-looking modern carrier and was dubbed Son of Raffles. The Son of Raffles only lasted 41 consecutive issues.
So I guess these days we would be on like great-great-grandson of Raffles.
During World War II, pages were used to mandate rationing to support America's armed forces and to notify the postponement of the 1945 convention.
When America went into World War II, things were different. NALC had to postpone their 1945 convention, so the Union president at the time, William Doherty, he leaned heavily on the postal record to keep members informed about what was going on. And then once the war did end, to suddenly scramble to put together a national convention as soon as possible.
During the war effort, the cover went through another overhaul and was replaced by photographs starting in January 1942 to show photos of letter carriers at work or scenes from around the country. These photos still splash the covers of the Postal Record today.
When it came to the Wildcat strike, it was a bit different because the strike came from the members and not the leadership. And so the magazine at the time, the President James Rademacher, he was trying to lead the national organization, keeping the leaders of the organization from being jailed, to keep the publication, to keep the union from being taken over by the U.S. government. And so he really was walking this knife's edge of trying to talk about the strike without coming out and formally endorsing the strike. And so it's really reflected in those 1970 postal records where letter carriers are writing in and they're publishing newspaper transcripts and things like that to really talk about what was going on with the strike, but also maintain what the NALC National needed to say in order to be able to stay in existence while this strike was going on, and really fighting the President Richard Nixon at the time.
President James Rademacher used the magazine to report the news of the strike from the perspective of the union's involvement in it, as well as the news media's coverage of it. President Rademacher said, "I remember laying it all out myself, on the conference table, in my office, on the 8th floor. The Postal Record allowed members to voice their concerns, even when they disagreed with the prevailing policy, even during the Great Postal Strike." Up until 1984, the strategy for producing the magazine was the NALC president will lay out the mock-up of the Postal Record, usually in their conference room. This changed, however, when President Sombrado relinquished the hands-on control of the Postal Record and hired a small staff of communications professionals to take over writing and laying out the magazine.
When Vince Sombrado came in the 80s, he decided to do things differently. He wanted to modernize things. And so he hired professional staff. He hired an editor, he hired a writer, he hired an editorial assistant. And at the time, they handled most of the editing, most of the writing, but the design and layout would be sent to an outside company to do it. Eventually, that was brought in-house so that the editors, the writers would go ahead and do the layout themselves. And what that did was it really saved the union a lot of money in terms of hiring an outside organization to do it. And over the years, it's also allowed the organization to have a lot of liberty, a lot of freedom, a lot of flexibility to go ahead and take care of other publications as well.
The president of the union, at any time in its history, retains the title of editor-in-chief, and as the NALC's top letter carrier representative, has the ultimate say on what happens in print. One thing will never change, and that's the process of printing a magazine and sending it through the mail to arrive at your door.
Yeah, as fun as waxed pages and things like that sound, I think I'll stick to to reading my PDFs. And
Just kidding. We finally made it to the 2000s. Published monthly by the NALC, the Postal Record is received by every member, active and retired. While the magazine's mission has remained constant since 1887, the Postal Record has managed to keep up with the changing times and styles. In 2002, technological improvements at last made a full-color magazine cost-effective. In an interview about the Postal Record, President Emeritus Rolando said, "This union has never shied away from challenges brought about by improvements in communications. Instead, we've always met those challenges head-on and have looked for ways to exploit new technology for our benefit, from the telegraph to the telephone to the fax machine to the internet." In 2012, for the 125th anniversary of the Postal Record, President Rolando did a special interview to mark the occasion. He stated, "For 125 years, not only has our magazine kept this union's membership informed and in touch, it also has helped document our craft's history and triumphs. The Postal Record provides a tangible testament to the notion that communication helps bring people together. I think the reason the magazine has endured has to do with the nature of our union's membership. All of us do just one job. We carry the mail, and we have a single employer. Most other union publications must cater to the various crafts represented by those organizations. They are forced to try to be all things to all members. But with the Postal Record, every single page is relevant to all letter carriers, active and retired alike." The Postal Record evolved once again in 2013. Members noticed a subtle implementation of a vibrant new color scheme, accompanied by more modern-looking typography. Fred Rolando said, this is just the latest step in our ongoing embrace of technology. NALC Director of Communications and Media Relations, Philip Dine, along with Managing Editor Michael Shea, are the key players in the final product that goes to your mailbox monthly. Copies of the magazine also land on the desks of important decision makers in Washington, D.C., and throughout the international labor movement. In keeping with the realities of the internet age, selected features and columns are also posted on the union's website. Anyone who has internet access can download selected features, stories, and columns posted to nalc.org in PDF format.
So we're really trying to use the information that we have and trying to reach as many members as we can. And we're using different tools to get it because members like different tools. We, as an organization, have to figure out where to put our resources in order to reach as many members as possible. So we'll put together information for the postal record and we'll prepare that. And then we'll use smaller bite-sized versions of it in the NALC bulletin so that we can get it into the stations. We'll turn it into PDFs and we'll put it all up on the website so that members can get it there if they want. We put selective articles on columns and we shoot them out through social media or the app. As many of the podcast listeners probably know, we record a number of articles from the postal record and record them and put out an audiobook version. So we're really trying to use the information that we have and trying to reach as many members as we can.
That communications in our daily lives have really evolved over the years. And, with the internet coming along, however many years ago that was, then social media and podcasts and videos. And so while the Postal Record remains a monthly publication, we have really made an effort to, make that content available in a number of different ways.
During the 1880s, communication wasn't traveling across the country the way it is now. And so it was a real opportunity for letter carriers to communicate with each other. And that's something that stayed with it ever since then. And it's something that you don't see in a lot of other publications. And it's something that NALC should be really proud of within the postal record.
The magazine pages of today are more detailed, with reports and analysis of news that interests letter carriers, like the struggles to preserve pay, benefits, and working conditions. Pages and columns you can find inside the postal record include the President's Message, the pay schedule, COLA updates, officer columns, contract talk, workers' compensation, MDA coordinator, and education. The postal record provides members an opportunity to speak their minds on a variety of issues. President Rolando said, "We strive to represent various points of view in the postal record. A lot of what appears in the pages comes directly from the members."
One of the nice things is, while we're writing and editing the stories that are going up front, all of the officers, a number of letter carrier and professional staff submit columns to us to do some of the writing. And so that really brings in a lot of the news about what's going on in various parts of the organization.
It's in our Constitution that our branches and state associations submit items, and they can essentially, subject to a very few limits that are also provided in the Constitution, they can basically say whatever they want. And the result is that the magazine, to any NALC member, when they read it, they, of course, get views and information from headquarters, but also I think that perspective that they get from reading about what's going on in different parts of the country is really valuable.
There are various items that can be submitted by branches to the postal record, which include branch items, state summaries, retiree reports, photos, election notices, mutual exchange ads, heroics of letter carriers and goods of the service, and story ideas. The Union's official archives have been housed in the Walter P. Reuther Library at Wayne State University in Detroit since 2001 and is open to the public. Visitors to Reuther can consult the papers of the past presidents Rademacher, Baca, Sombrado, and Young, along with records of other national officers and headquarters staff. Videos and photographic images are also available. In fact, this website is where I was able to get a lot of my old photos for this video.
So we have the digital archive online, I think going back to about 2010. Before that, I have the internal digital files going back until about 1995 or so. And we always have the hard copies. So we have the actual postal record hard copy magazines going all the way back to the beginning of the postal record and certainly the beginning of the NALC. So
or often there's branches that do maybe projects on their own history, and there may be someone that remembers something that was in a magazine from their branch or about their branch years ago. And for anyone that's interested in that type stuff, we will definitely do everything we possibly can to find, if we can, whatever it is that you're asking for and get it to you.
We're reminding letter carriers that you're not just your uniform. There are people in those uniforms, and what you do is important, and you represent the entire country. And that's the great thing about our organization is we have letter carriers from everywhere in the country, from all walks of life. And like I said, it's really lucky that we get to do it in the Postal Record, and I feel really glad to have been able to do this with my career, to work for letter carriers.
Oh look, it's the Supreme Court judges who gave us the 8-hour law, but this time they would rule on a case that would have lasting effects for years to come. The landmark 1896 Supreme Court decision, Plessy v. Ferguson, created a legal precedent for the separation of Americans by race, and the resulting policies constructed an inaccurate system of rules and regulations that disempowered Black people and subjected them to constant harassment. Victor Green lived in the famed Sugar Hill community in Harlem, New York, until his retirement in 1952. He was a full-time letter carrier for the U.S. Post Office when he created the Green Book. He enlisted his fellow postmen to make contact with Black entrepreneurs along their routes and invite them to list in the Green Book, as well as sell the guide to travelers. The Green Book was created for Black Americans to travel safely through Jim Crow America.
We were working on this, somebody just came in and said, hey, do we know anything about this? And we didn't know anything about it. And so started doing the research. And as we were doing it, after we put out the magazine article about it and about Victor Green and the important work he did, suddenly there was a movie about it that won an Academy Award. Suddenly there were stories about it everywhere, and people were really recognizing the accomplishment that this letter carrier had done. And it's always been telling to me that whenever we've seen articles about it, they always talk about the Green Book, but they never talk about the letter carrier at the center of it. And that was really important, I think, for us to recognize that there was a human being at the center of it, what his motivation was, the work that he did in order to accomplish this thing. And I feel really lucky that we got to tell that story to the letter carriers, to remind them, the work that they do both in the Postal Service, but also what they do outside of the Postal Service. It can be of vital importance.
The Green Book helped during the Civil Rights Movement because it listed Black entrepreneurs from hotels to beauty shops. These places became the headquarters for holding America accountable for its promise of liberty and justice for all. You can take your own Green Book journey across the country by visiting the Smithsonian's online exhibit. Even in the age of the internet, the postal record remains a vital and healthy component of how this great democratic union communicates with its members and how members communicate with one another. Each month's edition is a window into the various challenges letter carriers face, one post to the next. At the same time, the magazine continues to help national leaders rally the rank and file around causes important to all active and retired members.
So on the website is the members only section. If you can go and you can log into there, you'll be able to see the address that NALC has for you on record, and that's where we send the postal record. What you can also do is contact the NALC membership department by phone. They will confirm your address or go ahead and change your address.
I believe President Emeritus Rolando said it best. Sometimes letter carriers report seeing the magazine buried in bundles of mail and destined for delivery to their fellow members a day or two before the magazine gets delivered to their own homes. And that's what helps make the postal record unique and special to the NALC. It takes advantage of what we do best. We deliver.